Hello everybody, it's your friendly digital technology librarian, Christy here. We've reached another Friday, so of course I have another Film Rec Friday ready for everybody out there. So this month, Kanopy is doing this fantastic feature all about music in films. So on their Musical May feature page, there are a ton of really amazing music documentaries. There are some really fantastic biopics about iconic musicians. And of course, there's a broad selection of musicals from pretty much every era. Today we're going to focus on two musicals that come from the tail end of what is considered the golden age of movie musicals. That would be usually from the 1930s to the mid-1950s. Now, these two musicals that I wanted to focus on both seem superficially to be light and fluffy, when in reality, one of them is definitely not. So one of the two films definitely leans way hard into your classic musical rom-com tropes. It's got a particularly iconic duo that worked together multiple times, very much people who are kind of ubiquitous when it comes to movie musicals. The other seems to be a light and fluffy musical, but underneath it actually covers some seriously dark themes. And I thought it was interesting, and it would be an interesting conversation to have about these two particular films. So, like always, these two recommendations are available to you entirely for free with the use of your Milan-Berlin library card. So without any further ado, let's get to the recs. Okay, my first recommendation is the one that leans pretty hard into those classic movie musical rom-com tropes, and that is 1950s summer stock. So, basic description. While her younger actress sister Abigail roams the country with a stock theater company, country girl Jane stays home in rural Connecticut tending to the family farm. Jane sees red when Abigail returns unannounced with the stock company in tow, and they have plans to convert the family's barn into a venue for the troupe's musical revue. After Abigail's beau Joe sells his car to buy Jane a new tractor, though, the farm girl softens and even gets bitten by the performing bug herself. So that's a pretty simplified description of what's going on, but I think it kind of indicates where this movie musical is going. If you've watched very many classic movie musicals, you probably can already see what relationships might get tweaked around, and just how the plot may end. But predictability isn't really a drawback here. It's one of those things that, I mean, really, when you watch a lot of golden era musicals, they are fairly predictable, and I don't think that that's a bad thing. What makes this kind of magical and classic is the cast and the musical numbers. So your two leads, that's Jane and Joe, are played by Judy Garland and Gene Kelly, two massive icons in that golden era of musical movies. Judy Garland, of course, famous primarily for Wizard of Oz and a whole slew of really big box office hits post that. And Gene Kelly, most famous for Singin' in the Rain. Phenomenal performers, both of them incredible icons of the industry. And they had worked together in the past, and I'll get a little bit more into that later. So this musical has fantastic actors besides them. Phil Silvers is in here, Gloria DeHaven is in here, and a number of others. But the musical numbers are also really, really huge draws. You've got Howdy Neighbor, Happy Harvest, Dig, Dig, Dig for Your Dinner, and of course the iconic Get Happy. Now, Get Happy is probably one of those musical numbers that the majority of people who aren't musical fans will still be able to identify. Played a huge role in the older Clinique happy perfume promotions. And it's also just one of those scenes that ends up in pretty much every big AFI or film company's best of lists. That's the Get Happy is the number where Garland performs in just the tuxedo jacket, the black fedora, and black nylons. She's surrounded by a sea of male dancers who are all seemingly enthralled by her. And who wouldn't be? She's thoroughly magnetic in the whole scene. And the fact that she is so good in this particular scene makes the reality of what was going on behind the scenes even more fascinating. So during this production, there were myriad issues, a lot of which were exacerbated by Garland's growing dependence on drugs. She had been plagued with substance abuse issues from early on in her career, a lot of which were prompted by the studio. Uppers to get her up, downers to get her down. It was a crazy time in the industry. And so, of course, the more she does these, the more she grows dependent on them. And this is, in the 50s, her career was definitely on a downswing at this particular moment. And Kelly, who had worked with her on a couple of other films, For Me and My Gal, which was his first big Hollywood musical, as well as another musical called The Clown, or The Pirate. And he enjoyed working with her. The two of them had a really great rapport. They had box office success. And he actually did this particular film as a favor to her. He was still on an upswing in his career. The director for this also did this as a favor to Garland. He had also directed her in a number of other films. And they were able to work with her through some of these difficulties. So the fact that it is this iconic movie musical is just amazing because of all of the wheels turning in the background that we never knew about at the time. So when you think about that and all of the effort put into helping keep this woman afloat, it's really, really pretty incredible. Even the studio, which you don't really hear about studios being so behind someone that they will see them through all of these issues, was, definitely willing to give her a lot of leeway, because at the time Louis B. Mayer was still in charge, and he felt that she really had helped create this whole studio's success. I mean, with all of her massive box office draw, especially after The Wizard of Oz. So yeah, it's one of those films that is a fascinating piece of history. All of these bits and pieces coming together and culminating in this. Now, Summer Stock is certainly a film of its time. There are some themes and scenes that feel quite outdated, particularly when it comes to the roles of individuals within a relationship. The concept of masculinity is constantly being thrown about in here, but the most questionable moments are never between our two primary lovers. It's always other characters, which does make it slightly more palatable. It's almost more of an example of what's wrong and what's problematic. So those cringy moments make sense in a bit of a way. But really, anytime we're looking at films that were made more than half a century ago, you're going to have those little moments that are a bit jarring. That's just the function of time passing and norms and cultural standards passing. So I would definitely say give Summer Stock a chance. One, musical numbers are fantastic. The chemistry between Garland and Kelly is always fantastic. And it's just a really fun, classic movie musical, I think. That sort of let's put on a show kind of mentality, which is exactly, it fits in with this whole genre of musicals that had that sort of get up and go nature to them. So yeah, if you're looking for something like that, make sure you check out Summer Stock. It really is an excellent, excellent viewing option. Okay, the other film that I wanted to discuss today is the one that is actually really quite heavy, though on the surface it seems very light and fluffy. That is 1953's Lili. So, basic description. Leslie Caron stars as an innocent young girl, a vulnerable orphan waif who finds a home with the puppet show in a traveling circus, along with the love of a man who, at first, can only open his heart through the deeds and words of his marionettes. That description is not untrue, but there's so much more going on than that. So I remember watching this film when I was very young, and I haven't seen it really since, but I do remember really enjoying the film as a child. I remembered that there were puppets, there was a circus, there was a really catchy tune that played throughout the whole movie, and it was a fun watch. Then a handful of weeks ago when I rewatched it, I was like, what was I remembering? Because there's that, well, yes, there are puppets. There's a jaunty little tune going on. There's a young girl, some great costumes, but there's so much that I did not catch. And and I do think that that's a good thing, but it really is a really fascinating film. So Lily, our main character, is orphaned, and she travels to this other little French village that her father said she should go to should anything happen to him. So when he passes, she travels to this village, hoping to get an apprenticeship with a baker her father had known. Unbeknownst to her, the baker is no longer there, and she is now completely alone and adrift. This film does a very good job, really, of depicting all of the problems that probably cropped up post World War II. There were tons of orphans. Like, people, like, there had been so much death in Europe that, there were a lot of people who were just adrift and had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. And some of the things that she faces very quickly in this film, by the by, would have been things that a lot of young women on their own would have had to face. She eventually joins a circus. She, as a young girl, falls in love very quickly with people she should absolutely not fall in love with. And, things just kind of snowball. Even the characters that are designed to protect her and love her, there are definitely layers going on there. There are questions of, like, whether or not there should be a established tie between people just because they save one another. There's just a lot going on, and I found that really, really interesting on this particular viewing. Also, if you follow trigger warnings, this one is, there should be a plethora on this one. There are thoughts of suicide, attempted assault, adultery, possessive behavior. It is a sort of crazy minefield of all of these themes put to lightly, lively, and jaunty music. I mean, again, as a small child, that was the only thing I could remember. But as an adult, this little motif that you hear over and over again is actually almost a little bit menacing in some ways. Now, Lili is based on a story by Paul Gallico called The Love of Seven Dolls. I have not read the story. I, in fact, did not know it was based on this until I started looking into the film more as an adult. And I guess the story it's based on is actually even darker than the film. Now, the film does not present itself as a dark thing at all. The romance is, supposed to be uplifting and enlivening, and okay, it is definitely a love story. But there's just a lot going on. Like I said, there are those moments of, like, established, what's the right word for it? Encumbrance, perhaps? Because our hero, and he's definitely an anti-hero, he is, and admittedly, and we hear about this, he is angry, he is distanced. He was a man who had been a ballet dancer before the war, was injured during the war, and then is, of course, thrust out of that industry in which he was gaining so much acclaim. And he's now in a podunk traveling circus doing this show that has nothing to do with his passion. So he's got a whole lot of baggage going on. And then the gentleman that Lili initially falls in love with is actually this married, philandering magician whose wife knows about his issues but stays with him and just feels that eventually everything is going to settle down. And these are very, these are very real characters. I'm not surprised that any of these characters behaves the way that they do. It's just so strange to see it in this musical. Especially this musical, I remember it as something entirely different. And granted, it's been 30 years since I've seen it, so but it is very telling what a child will see versus what an adult will. And I wonder if the 20-year-old me would have even picked up on all of the sort of strange and, like, shady things going on in the background. The things that we see from time period to time period. Anyway, I do really like this film. I do think it's like enthralling in a lot of ways. There are a couple of musical dance numbers that are absolutely magnetic. Leslie Caron is so brilliant on screen. I love her in all of her films. Another super sketchy one is Gigi, where she was, I believe, even younger, playing a young girl who is essentially forced into being a courtesan. So she's no stranger to these sort of more controversial topics within her musicals. But she just does such a fantastic job. You really believe her as this young girl who's just thrown out into the world and is just reacting to things. At no point does it feel like stilted or stunted. Mel Ferrer plays Paul, who is the puppeteer that she meets and whose act she joins. His character is definitely a dark, broody one, I will say. But the dark, brooding hero has always been, a feature in romances. I mean, like, you look at Rochester in Jane Eyre, and he was not a good guy, but Jane Eyre is an iconic romance. So it's not like these themes or types of characters are out of nowhere. So anyway, if you are looking for something that is quite complicated and really fascinating, make sure you check out Lili. Again, there's just so much going on, and it really is just an exercise in sort of like parsing out bits and pieces of storylines and archetypes, and at the end of the day, I did really enjoy it for a lot of reasons. So once again, Lili from 1953, it's a must watch. Okay, so those were my recommendations for today. If you have any recommendations for movie musicals that you would like to share with others, please pop those in the comments below. If you have any recommendations for themes you'd like to see us cover in the future, definitely share those with me. I am always looking for help with that. As always, thank you so much for joining me. I love doing these, and revisiting these two films was a ton of fun. And with that, I'm going to go close out this episode. Again, thank you so much for joining me, and hopefully I will see you next week. Bye-bye.